to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
Hi.
Hey.
Okay. So you do not have to have done homework to listen to this episode, but I am going to tell you that we're going to draw heavily from our episode where we debriefed Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy, which we did at the end of March. You guys should totally go back and listen to that. You don't have to listen to it before you listen to this, but we're definitely going to reference some things from it. And I'm going to tell you why this is coming back around so quickly. But at the end of that episode, or maybe it wasn't even in that episode, I think I might have mentioned it at another point a week or two later, but it was definitely, I was thinking it, okay, which was, remember I said, no, I did say it out loud. Remember how I said, this book makes me want to quit coaching? Because I'm like, you don't need me. You just read this book. You just need this. I'm going to retract that, because what I really mean is that I think there's a lot of books out there, or there are starting to be more, books about attachment theory. And there's multiple accounts now, not just Dr. Becky, about like helping raise competent, emotionally intelligent humans. And that's awesome. But what I have seen and heard from multiple like therapists and psychologists is like, oh, attachment theory and a lot of the stuff that like that book in particular got into, oh, it's applicable to like raising kids and your romantic relationship, but it doesn't really, attachment theory doesn't really count at work. And I'm like, I could not disagree more. And this episode is going to be my soapbox where I prove all the haters wrong and all the people who think they know more than me wrong, because they don't. You and I have spent over a decade coaching people around their career on a deep level. And I'm going to tell you, it is a beat for beat comparison to a lot of the stuff that you hear people talking about romantic relationships and like parenting. It is the same. And so guess what? In fact, we might need us.
We might make a case. We're going to make a case that it could show up stronger in work relationships than in personal relationships. We're going to get into it.
So I guess I can't retire because you need me. And but truly, because there are not a lot of people who are willing, able, and experienced to talk about this deep, like the deeper patterns as they relate to your career.
And there's the first level of awareness. First of all, you have to even recognize what your patterns are. I think books are fantastic about that. I think Good Inside is one of the best books for recognizing your patterns and starting to think about how you might change them. But reading a book,
not the same thing as working with Dr. Becky, I could imagine.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Not accessible to probably most people at this point. I think she's probably a little bit too well known for that.
By the way.
Oh, yeah, smart. That's smart.
Yeah, she's got monthly fee.
She's had to scale, for sure.
She had to.
But there's a difference between becoming aware of, oh, that's why I keep attracting the same boss or the same work culture, or that's why I keep people pleasing,
chronically underpaid,
and seeing where that came from and understanding the pattern, but then changing it and staying accountable and not defaulting back into your old ways when you get triggered or stressed. That is a lot harder to do on your own. That is way easier when you have somebody in your corner supporting you, talking you through it, coming up with, your strategy and your mindset on how you're going to handle all of these changes as you're going through them in real time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we can't quit because we need the implementation piece.
Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, a lot of career coaches, and I'm not knocking them, it's just not who we are, but there are a lot of career coaches who are just helping you change jobs. Mm-hmm. And like, let's update your resume. And I'm like, when you get to the point where you know what you want and you are like eagerly going after it, absolutely work with those people because they know more about that than Kristen and I are ever going to know. But a lot of those people are not interested in helping you, or maybe don't even have the ability to help you get to the root of, why am I stuck in these career patterns in the first place? Like, why do I not know what I want? Mm-hmm. And is what I want actually what I really want? Because sometimes the change I think I need is not the change I really need. And I don't know, like, what to do. And I'm afraid to take action because what if I waste a ton of time?
I kind of wish that traditional career coaching wasn't called coaching, because I don't really think that's what it is. I think a lot of times when people are seeking out a career coach because they want to change jobs, they just want somebody to give them advice on their resume. They want somebody to help them with interview prep. That's not coaching.
No.
It's probably more in the realm of consulting, where somebody is giving you their advice and their something. Right. But that's not really what coaching is meant to be. And so I think it all gets conflated into the same big category, but that's not supposed to be the point of coaching.
No. Or maybe we should have been career therapists, because maybe that would have been more accurate.
We could be, I'm not sure that exists. We could be the first career therapist.
Well, then we have to go back to school to actually become therapists. And like, I feel like that's a waste of time. I know 85% of what they're going to teach me already, and I didn't have to pay $55,000 a year.
I think we're more in the realm of trauma-informed career coaching.
Absolutely. That's what this is. We are trauma-informed career coaches, because everyone's got trauma, and we're going to get into that today. Okay. But I'm preluding with all of this because I want to remind you guys that we are in the midst. The absolute midway point is today, if you're listening to this the day it comes out, of our coaching enrollment, which will remind you we do only a handful of times per year. And like that could change. I'm having thoughts about that potentially being, I don't know why I just started talking like Moira Rose, but I'm going to go with it. I'm having thoughts about the frequency of that, and it might change in the future, David. But anyway,
no promises when it's going to come back. We don't know. So
yeah, more to come potentially on us changing some things up, because, you know, we like to change. We like to keep things fresh. But as of right now, we are in a coaching enrollment period, and it is a really good time if you would like to do a lot of this deeper work. If you find yourself relating to a lot of the people we're about to talk about in this episode, if you know that you are stuck in some deep patterns when it comes to your life and career, and you really want to change, and you just don't know where to start, and you're a little overwhelmed, and you're mostly functional. That's the difference between coaching and therapy, by the way. Therapy is meant to help you go from really like dysfunctional to functional, but that leaves a huge gap. And that's where coaching is meant to take over, is to take you from functional to optimal.
Yep. Functional is not the end goal here.
That's not fulfilling. That's not joy. That's not happiness.
Get through your day, but you're not feeling satisfied. You're not really into it. And then tomorrow's just a repeat.
Well,
and that's the goal. No.
That's your whole life? Wow. I really hope that I'm 90 one day and I'm like, well, I got through it. You know, like that's not the goal. It's not the goal. So if you want to live optimally, that is what coaching is meant to do. But in order to do that, there are some blocks and some patterns and some stuff that, maybe like if you're in therapy, you're already working through some of that. But there are very specific ways it does show up in your career that often your therapist never talks to you about.
And your therapist is not as trained as a coach in what to do now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of healing work that can happen, a lot of awareness work that can happen, and that can take you pretty far. But it doesn't, a lot of people get frustrated when they've been in therapy for a while because they're like, yeah, I know where my stuff came from. I've read the books. We've talked it out. What am I supposed to do now? What?
Now? Yeah.
That's where coaching is a perfect complement to a lot of that awareness and healing work that you might have already been doing. That's where coaching is a perfect complement to a book like Good Inside, where you understand, oh, that's why I'm the way I am. Okay, now what? If that's the question you're trying to ask yourself, it's like, I'm familiar. Like, I know that I might come from a dysfunctional family. I know that I have some habits that are not that healthy. Maybe I just don't know what to do.
Well, and maybe I've even started to try to like set boundaries and change some patterns, but it's slow going. And it also is not like holistically solving all of my problems and helping me figure out like, well, what about my life's direction? Like, sure, I can set some boundaries. That's not helping me know where the heck I'm going in life though, and what like my deeper meaning and purpose is. That is the point of the kind of work Kristen and I do. Okay. Maybe not all coaches, but that's what Kristen and I do. So if all of that is resonating with you, you got one more week of our enrollment period, which means we will set up an intro chat with you. Go to clarityonfire.com/coaching. That will also be in the show notes, and fill out the form on that page. And we will have one of us will have a chat with you and just get clear on like, where are you at? And if this would be a good fit for you. Because it's got to be a win-win or else we're not going to do it. We're never going to pressure you into doing it. In fact, those make for the worst clients. So I actively sometimes discourage people from doing it. And then if they still really want to do it, then I'll work with them. And we can talk about the difference between, the smaller amount, 3 months of coaching versus the more large, normal 6-month length of coaching. And so it's not like something you're 100% committed to when you fill out that form. But you're just committed to having a serious conversation about it.
And like we said, you have one more week to fill out that form and say, yes, I want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Just so you know, we're recording this a little early, so I don't know how many spots are left, but it is not unlimited.
No, we only started out with maybe like 10 spots in the first place. So I'm positive not all of those are available as of today.
So like we say, there's another week, but the sooner the better, because we don't know how many slots are going to be available by the end of the enrollment period. So just a heads up. It also does not mean if you're listening to this after our enrollment period is over that you can't work with us. It just means go fill out a wait list form, and
same page,
we'll
same
let
form.
you know if and when we have availability.
Yeah. Never hurts at any point to just fill out that form, because we may have availability. It just depends on the time of year. So don't count yourself out. Just like with jobs, and you're applying and you're like, oh, I don't have 100% of the qualifications. I can't apply. Yes, you totally can. Because like, you got to let the universe decide if that's right for you. Not exactly. You shouldn't count yourself out. Okay. So we'll definitely circle back to this at the end, because it'll be pretty obvious considering how on the nose most of our conversation is going to be. So, okay. Let me remind you guys of something. In Good Inside, the whole theory, in a real little nutshell, is that parenting, and another word for that is just how you relate to people, because you don't have to be a parent. This can be how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others, even if they're not children and they're not your children. It doesn't matter. But the goal is to speak to people, raise people, treat yourself with the assumption that you are already good inside, and to prioritize connection and relationship building over trying to mold and influence and punish and reward someone's behavior to be compliant to what you want. And again, don't have to have listened to that episode yet, but if you haven't, I really, really, really recommend you go back and check that out. Okay, the thing I want to zero in on, though, that she specifically talks about in the book, and this is just a basic psychology 101 principle, that you can read in many books, it's not just in Good Inside, is attachment theory. Okay. So to remind you what attachment theory actually is that children who figure out how to keep an attachment figure, so a caregiver, a parent, nearby, are more likely, obviously, biologically, to receive comfort and protection, which means they're more likely to survive. It is a deeply ingrained instinctual need to keep the people whose survival you are reliant upon happy. And if the people who you are relying on to survive make it clear that there are certain things that are going to threaten your attachment to them, like you having feelings they don't like,
you disagreeing with them.
Yeah. You will learn to shut down, suppress, amputate certain aspects of yourself and increase others that might not actually come naturally to you in order to keep these people close. It is a deeply ingrained, again, survival mechanism.
Which is just so wild to think, if that's the premise of attachment theory, and obviously we understand that it comes from your attachment to your caregivers when you're a child, but guess what? You still have that same dynamic in your adulthood. It's called your employer. It's called the people paying you to help you stay alive. How people think that attachment theory doesn't show up at work is kind of wild to me.
I know.
Because there's the dependency factor built right in.
I know. So I want to hit you smack in the face with this. Work is exactly what I just described. The only difference is you're not a child. Okay?
They're your new parents.
You have a figure or an entity, maybe not one person, whose survival you feel deeply that you depend on. They are paying you. They are giving you money. And even if you don't work for someone, maybe you own your own business. Clients.
Yeah, your clients and your customers are
it's the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you have a figure or an entity that you are dependent upon for survival. That inherently creates an imbalance of power. It puts a lot of power in the other entity's hands and very little in yours, which means you are now motivated to, just like you did in childhood, suppress certain aspects of your personality that you know are not going to be acceptable in order to continue receiving the resources that you need to survive. This is where people pleasing comes up. This is where perfectionism comes up. This is where not being allowed to have the full range of human experiences in the workplace is not allowed, right? Like, it is attachment trauma all over again. And of course, it's not new attachment trauma. What it does is just highlight all of the stuff that we learned when we were 3 years old. And now we're just repeating it at 33 years old or 63 years old.
If you never healed from your attachment issues from childhood, don't worry, you'll get plenty of opportunities to do that because you're going to get the same patterns repeated in adulthood, especially at work. And again, I think attachment theory is almost exclusively talked about when it comes to romantic relationships, which makes sense. It absolutely shows up in that context. But I would argue it might be exacerbated even more at work because of that power dynamic that we just described.
You don't need a boyfriend or a girlfriend to survive anymore. I think in the 1950s or earlier, right? I think that was a much more legitimate argument because women in particular, we weren't allowed, there was so many professions we weren't allowed to do. It was in many places very culturally unaccepted and looked down upon for women to work at all. And so they were very dependent on their partners in a way that caused a big imbalance of power and a weird power dynamic. Now in 2023, for the most part, that's not the problem. So our relationships, thankfully, have evolved to the point where we're not in this really funky imbalance of power situation where we're totally reliant on someone else to provide for us. We can go get a job if we need to get a job. We can provide for ourselves. No one's preventing us from getting a credit card, which women were not allowed to do until 1974, by the way.
Insane.
Without their father or their husband co-signing it. Insanity. Like, anyway, some of the people listening to this were full on adults before that happened, which is, again, truly insane. So those power dynamics are equaling out. I mean, obviously we still are not, it's not perfect. We have a ways to go, but of course it's natural that those attachment issues do get triggered in romantic relationships. They absolutely do. And to ignore the fact that they are constantly getting triggered at work is ridiculous, because the power dynamic is even more obvious there most of the time.
Yeah, it's more tied directly to survival.
Yes.
Which is where attachment theory gets most activated, is when you are doing behaviors in the name of self-protection and self-survival.
Yeah.
Where is that more evident as adults than with your job? So we want to give some examples of clients we've worked with over the years, that
how it shows up, how their attachment trauma has shown up at work, so that you can start to recognize your patterns. Now, I know we've talked about this before. It's not like this isn't the first time we've said this. I just felt the need to have like a whole separate episode and conversation about it, so that you could focus on it for like at least 30 minutes and just think about how, in more minute, nuanced ways, this could be showing up for you.
I would argue is showing up.
It would be really hard for it not to, because guess what? You all have you were all children at some point. You all had a childhood. You all had attachment figures, and none of them were perfect.
Nope.
And so you have attachment trauma, just like everybody.
And even if you are getting better at responding in a healthy way now, it doesn't mean you're not still experiencing that same dynamic.
Yeah, or that the tendency to want to respond in a certain way is there, even if you're conscious of it. So anyway, okay, so the reason I wanted to have this conversation and do this episode was because I was having a conversation with one of my clients a few weeks ago, and she has been listening to Good Inside after I told her to. And she emailed me and was like, "Oh my God, Rachel, this is just making so much sense." She's like, "I'm an only child, and the way my parents dealt with my feelings was like just to ignore me. And like, I was very isolated often with my feelings. Like no one was like expressing interest. It was just like, go to your room and, like basically don't bother us with your feelings." And she's like, "And I have just habitually ended up in jobs where I am isolated and no one is offering me any help or resources."
Yep.
And she's like, "I cannot ignore how obvious of a comparison that is."
It's heartbreaking, but it makes sense. When you look back, it always makes sense what you attract, because in a weird way, it's comfortable in its familiarity. It's not comfortable in that that's what we want. But when you have a dynamic that is familiar, it makes sense that we would attract more of the same, consciously or unconsciously. And I don't want that to feel like I'm blaming you for attracting it.
Well, no,
it's just the nature of, it's just human nature.
You can't blame like if you take I don't know, like an AI or something, and you program it a certain way, and you program it, let's like say you program it to talk like Regina George from Mean Girls. Okay. You can't be mad at it if you show it a picture of your outfit and it's like, "Oh my God, that's so fugly." Like, you programmed it that way. It can be programmed in another way to respond in a more polite or more accurate way to the information you show it. But like, we are just very sophisticated AI, basically, just without the A, right?
Pure I.
Right. We're just pure I. And so like, as a kid, your parents, this is why it's so terrifying to become a parent when you don't know what the hell you're doing, because you are programming an entire human brain. That is what you are doing. And if you have no idea of the responsibility of that and how easy it is to mess it up, then I think fewer people would become parents, to be honest. But your parents are responsible for basically programming you to understand, here's the blueprint, here's like the formula for how you get acceptance. Here's how you get love. And so it's not your fault if then as an adult, you're still running that program my client, the program that, she learned inadvertently
is you have to deal with your own emotions.
Yeah. And like, that's when you're most acceptable, is when you take care of crap on your own. And so she just kept running that program. That's not her fault.
No. But once you become aware of it, then
it's your responsibility to change it once you're aware of it.
Then you can write a new program for your AI or your
help of some potential professionals.
Well, I would argue that would be at least the faster route, for sure. But yeah, it makes sense. I'm thinking of a client of mine who realized, and this is, again, there's some great books on the subject. This is definitely something she realized in therapy, that she had a narcissistic, manipulative mother.
Sure. A lot of people can relate.
And there's a lot of different ways that a kid can respond to that. But as an adult, what that was turning into was a lot of skepticism of other people.
Oh, not being able to trust other people's intentions and motives.
Really hard time trusting. And so she would jump to the worst conclusions when somebody would say something to her in a meeting, or especially at work. She was really triggered there because, again, there's that dynamic of I need this, but I also don't trust it. And so how do I square that? And she would find herself like jumping to these terrible interpretations of what people meant, or when they were just giving her feedback, like they're going to fire. Like it just would turn into, it's like she was constantly in conflict, even if it was just in her own mind. Sometimes it felt like she was in conflict with others, even if they didn't even always know she felt that way, because there was that conflict and chaos growing up. And she needed her mom, but she also wanted to keep her at an arm's distance away. Yeah. Because she was volatile and scary. And that dynamic kept playing out. So she was not getting on the project she wanted to get on, and she was not getting promoted. Like she was not making friends.
She was keeping the authority figures at an arm's
It's like, I need
distance.
this, I need the paycheck, and I need the work. And there are certain things that I want to progress in, but I don't trust any of it. And I don't trust any of them. And so it was really hard for her to progress, or really even to keep a job. Like at some point she would kind of create this conflict and sometimes would just quit. So you can see how, if you haven't healed that, and that's your relationship with dependency, that's the opposite. I think a lot of attachment theory, we talk about being overly attached and being
insecurely attached and anxious attached.
Yep. And she was the avoidant attached. Yeah. Absolutely.
Totally.
I need you, but I don't want you. I don't want to have to need you.
I don't
trust you.
I'm thinking of a client who grew up in a very chaotic, emotionally like volatile household, where very similar. I mean, maybe not a narcissistic mom, but like just parents who were totally unpredictable. And like every job she had was just chaos, because that is what was familiar to her. I mean, you will continue to attract what you find familiar.
Or on the flip side, I remember a client of mine who, her family was very focused on stability, right? They had a strong value on like stability and work ethic. And when she and her siblings were kids, her dad got laid off. And it took a long time for him to get work again. And so it was like finances were getting dicey. And she's like, even as a kid, she's like, I don't think I really knew how bad it was, but even I was picking up on a lot of tension in the household, because like there was just not money coming in and he didn't know when he was going to get work again.
And that in and of itself is a trauma.
Absolutely.
Like for him and for her.
Yes. There was a fear of survival fear.
Yeah.
And so as an adult, what did she seek out? The most stable federal government job she could get, because it's almost impossible to get fired.
You're only going to fail up in the government.
And she would tell me, I know what it takes to get fired. It's almost impossible. And so she would constantly complain about the lack of creativity and the bureaucratic red hoops that she had to jump through.
Red hoops. Red tape and hoops. Yeah. Well, sure, you invented something new.
Both and when it comes to the federal government.
Yep. They could find a way.
And it was obviously so constricted in terms of scheduling and time off. Everything was very regimented. And she hated that. She actually had a big creative spirit and kept trying to find these little creative avenues. But it was like looking for breadcrumbs when what she wanted was a big old loaf of bread. But she was terrified to even consider leaving such a stable job because that was her experience of working for other people in a private company, is that, oh my gosh, you can just get laid off at any point. And I never, ever, ever want to go through that again. So you can see how that attachment, again, the dependency, I need this to survive. I know what happens when it goes away. I will do anything. I will mold myself into this very formal, very professional, very structured environment, even though I'm kind of a creative free spirit, but I'm terrified. I'm too terrified to really be myself at work. It's heartbreaking.
And again, I want you to guys to realize a lot of these people didn't realize this until we started coaching. A lot of it started out as like, I just don't like my job and I don't know why. Or I keep like job hopping and nothing satisfies me. And I think I need to like quit and go back to grad school. Like, it's often not conscious. We're trying to help you become conscious of it now so that you can start asking questions. Let me, just because you said the word terrified so many times just there, I want to point out that that's a really good indication you've got trauma.
Yes.
If there is terror present, that is not normal. And I'm not judging it. I'm not saying that I'm sure, given if we were to understand where it came from, if we were to shine a light on its source, it would make perfect sense that you feel terror because it's rooted in something that's real, something that happened, or a message you received, right? But when you're feeling terror, like life-threatening terror around something that actually doesn't warrant it, that's a sign that there's unhealed and unprocessed trauma, and that it's not about like what you think it's not about your current situation. It's about something historical that needs to be addressed before, you can move on.
What was really fascinating to me was at that same time that I was coaching her, and she had this deep belief that you have to work in this particular kind of structure in order to have stability. And she was convinced of that. And a lot of the work we had to do was showing different examples of how people are living all kinds of different lives and have all kinds of different work experiences. And they're doing just fine.
And they're stable.
Not everybody who works in a private company is getting fired every other week.
No.
And even the idea of starting a business, that was like, couldn't even entertain that. That was like the craziest thing. At the same time, and this is the wild part about coaching, is that you see so many different people's stories and the beliefs that it leads to. And sometimes they're completely opposite. But the fear is the same. The fear is coming from the same place, but it manifests in these completely different ways. So at the same time, I'm also coaching this woman who comes from a family of business owners. Everybody in there was a family business, so a lot of them worked for that business, but there was also other family members who had their own businesses or their own side hustles. Like, everybody was entrepreneurial. And she grew up in this belief that you don't work for other people because then they're in charge of when you work, how you work. And that was inherently unstable. If somebody is employing you, at any point, somebody could decide we don't want to employ you anymore. If you're employing yourself, you're not going to fire yourself. You have more control and options from their perspective. So getting a job, any job, but in their family was like unstable. Yeah. You gotta take charge of your own destiny and your own career. And so I got to share those beliefs with the others and be like, you know what? I'm also talking to somebody anonymously, right? Who this is and they were mind blown at these completely different stories that both came from the same fear of financial instability. Yeah. Or not having choices. But look at how differently they manifest and how much they limit your choices when you buy into them. Wild.
last year, I'll put this in the show notes. We did an episode, I think it was a side chat, it was summer of last year, about what to do when you're tired of being tired. And that sounds vague, but it was about when you're tired of living in the system as it is and your responsibility to do your part to change it. And I mentioned one of my clients who I had finally gotten her to take lunch breaks for a year. She had, I think it was literally a year. She had been without an assistant, and they kept promising, oh, we're going to hire someone else. We're going to hire someone else, like a bad boyfriend, promising to change, but never doing it because you're continuing to tolerate it. Right. So for a year, she basically did 2 jobs. And so like never took a lunch break. And thinking about her attachment issues, I'm like, well, this makes perfect sense. Because that night she was going home every night and FaceTiming her parents and spending like a really long time on the phone. And she had this very regimented thing where like they were very, because like there were some health issues going on with her parents as they get older, which is understandable. But there was this like huge expectation that she talked to them for like hours on the phone every week, like almost every day, like many hours on the phone. So she had very little social life because she was like working all day, 2 jobs, and then had to come home. And of course we had to explore the family dynamic of like, why do you feel like you can't set boundaries with your parents? Mm-hmm. And the guilt that she felt for like having a life made me so upset because, but there's the attachment trauma is that like, in order for these people to like me and accept me, I cannot ever tell them no. By the way, I have a friend who told me that someone she knows has children who are not allowed to tell their dad no.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're girls, by the way. Yeah. Do the math. In 10 years,
I hate where that's leading.
In 10 years, you really want that 16-year-old girl
to not be
to have learned no? That it's not cool to tell a male no.
Oh, that is so dangerous.
Yeah.
So dangerous.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought of that because of her and
but
like how, like, this is what happens when you're so interested in controlling someone's behavior when they're little and, oh, you can't tell your mom no, or else you're going to be guilted and shamed. Then all of a sudden they're an adult who can't tell anyone no, and they're not allowed to have their own social life because now they're afraid to tell you no. And like, there you go. And of course, she's night and day now, 180-degree difference. That changed. She got an assistant. She started having lunch every day. She's doing amazingly right now, but she really had to work on checking those patterns,
rewiring that initial coding that as an adult you realize, oh, that was helping and to some degree, all parents do this. They try to manipulate, it's not a good word, but it's true, kids' behavior to make their lives easier. And even when you're trying, right? You're going to, as a parent, sometimes you're just going to have a really stressful day and you're like, I can't deal with you right now. Doesn't mean you're being a bad parent. It just means that you're human. All of us have experienced that to some degree. What doesn't work is when you take the things that you learned as a kid that were meant to make your parents' lives easier when you were being loud or obnoxious or cumbersome, and acting like that's an appropriate way to act as an adult. Oh, I just need to make everybody's lives around me easier. That's a really good way to lose yourself and to end up getting roped into all kinds of things that you do not want to be a part of, that are not a reflection of your values, your interests. It's where hardcore people pleasing can come in a big way. So we all got it honest to some degree or another. For some, it was all the time. For others, it was kind of in moments when your parents were just at their wits' end. But we all learn that to some degree. And now it's our job to unlearn it and to recognize that it's not your responsibility to make other people's lives easier by sacrificing yourself or your own physical or mental or emotional well-being.
So how do we push back on this a little bit? Because obviously there is some of you are not going to be able to get over the fear that if I start working on my attachment trauma and maybe pushing back and setting boundaries and having a different relationship with some of the emotionally immature people that I work with who remind me of my parents. Like, what if I lose my job? What if I lose my livelihood? What if I get fired? Listen, that's possible at any time. It's also possible to get laid off by a really good company at any time. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think we can live in fear, first of all. And I also think that, and I said this in that episode last year, I feel like this is like a sequel to that episode, which I will link to. I think that if you want to live in a better system, you have to do your part to make the system better. And that starts with healing your own stuff and by seeking out people and opportunities that are going to align better with who you are and what your values are. And if it's a really toxic, unhealthy, emotionally immature workplace with people who are explosive and point fingers and blame and try to reward you with tons of bonuses, and they try to punish you with taking crap away, but there's no interest in who you are as a person. There's no relationship building. There's no interest in your growth. Like, we're going to keep getting what we're willing to tolerate from everybody. And so for you to maybe start with read Good Inside, but read it as if you're taking it to work with you. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm a manager, how am I going to start talking to people differently? If I don't like how someone's treating me, how can I set some boundaries with them? How can I acknowledge and validate some of their feelings and then also hold my own ground? Like, the more you show up in a healthy way, the more possible it is for other people to show up in a healthy way too. But kind of has to start somewhere, and it's probably going to have to start with you.
It's definitely going to have to start with you.
Yeah.
I would also really encourage you, because the fear of what's going to happen if I speak up, or what's going to happen if I set a boundary, or what is going to happen if I take a lunch break, or if I get a different kind of job that feels less stable.
None of the people that we're talking about, by the way, encountered any disaster on the other side of healing their issues and like advocating for themselves and showing up like real emotionally mature adults at work. Their lives only got better. No one we're talking about has suffered as a result of doing this. The suffering ended once they stopped living from their trauma.
But they had to overcome their fear enough to be able to take those steps to realize, not only did nothing bad happen, but things are actually getting better.
Yeah, they had to baby step it a little bit.
And they had, I would say, one of the most important things that you're going to have to develop, and this is so much of the work we do in coaching, frankly, is building your sense of self-trust and your sense of self-reliance and resilience. Because there isn't a guarantee that if you speak up in a toxic work culture that you're not going to get bad repercussions. Sometimes
you could be punished for it.
There might be consequences. And if you don't trust yourself to be able to handle that, or to be able to bounce back, or to be able to catch yourself if you fall.
Or you don't trust the universe. Like, you know what? Like, the universe got my back.
Oh yeah. That's a whole other deeper level. And that's honestly where a lot of that self-trust comes from, is yes, it's me, but it's something also bigger than me.
Yeah, I trust I'm going to be supported no matter what happens.
If you don't have that, then of course you're not going to take a step, because it feels like that's the end. It feels like the survival fear kicks in a real enough, a convincing enough way that you're afraid, I'm not going to survive this. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my independence.
Yeah.
Something really dire is going to happen that I might not be able to bounce back from. So if you believe that, even on a subconscious level, you can't take that first step and realize this is not actually so bad, and actually things are getting better. So that's, again, a lot of the work we do is first recognizing what even are those patterns.
Yeah.
What are the patterning and the programming that I got as a young kid that's playing out now, and how is that getting in my way? But then how do I build up enough trust and belief in myself to handle whatever comes my way, to stand up for myself, and to set boundaries and to say, nope, I'm not willing to do that, or to make a change that feels a little riskier than I'm comfortable with. You have to build that muscle before you take the action. And then the more action you take, the muscle gets bigger and bigger because you're seeing the results of taking a quote unquote risky action and realizing nothing that bad happened and I'm actually in a better spot. But initially it takes a lot of courage. And to sometimes just asking yourself, what would happen if I spoke up and my boss shut me down? Or if I asked for a raise and I got fired, which has never happened. I've never seen it happen in the history of my 11 years of coaching. But that's that's what they fear. I'm going to ask for something and they're going to shut me down and tell me to leave.
Again, because maybe I wasn't allowed to have needs as a kid. And if I asked for something, I was told I was ungrateful for what I already had.
Yep. So if that's where your brain is going, it's going to that worst case. Sometimes you have to answer the question, what would I really do? First of all, that's never going to happen. But even if it did, would I really die?
What's my plan?
Right. How would I handle that? Okay. Maybe it would be uncomfortable for a little while, but you know what? I'm pretty resourceful. I'd figure it out.
Someone would take me in. I wouldn't be on the street.
That can be a good first step in realizing this is not irreversible.
Right. Like play out your worst case scenario and how likely is that to actually happen?
And even if it did, in the most unlikely of chances, would you really be in such a spot that you could never
recover from it?
Doubtful.
Very doubtful.
If you're here, you're pretty smart.
Yeah.
You are pretty conscious. You're pretty resourceful.
You got a friend or two in the world.
Yeah. I think you'd bounce back, but you have to remind yourself this is not the end.
Yeah. And again, it's so tempting because when you're little, it is the end.
Yep. That's where it's coming from.
If those people don't want to feed you, you're dead. If they don't want to take care of you, you're dead. As an adult, if those people don't want to keep paying you, you're not dead.
But the terror is still coming from that childhood place where it feels like I'm going to be dead.
Yeah.
I know that sounds dramatic, but
that's just the truth of where it's
why
coming from.
The fear is so big and it's paralyzing.
Yeah. But you're not a kid. You can remind yourself of that. I'm a damn adult. I have education and stuff. I have experience and stuff.
I pay my own rent or my own mortgage.
I'm resourceful. Even if you don't, maybe you've been married for 10 years and you've been a stay-at-home mom and you don't have any work experience for the last decade and you don't make your own money, girl, you are still hireable. Someone will want to give you money. It's possible. There's no person listening to this who does not have the wits and talent and resources to take care of themselves if something goes sideways. They just fear that they can't because it's not them. It's not the adult self that fears they can't handle it. It's the little kid self who fears they can't handle it. And that's a legitimate fear because when you're 5, you can't operate in the world on your own.
Nope. But you're not 5 anymore. So
no,
that's a lot of the work we get into in coaching.
It is.
You think you're coming in being like, I need a new job. And we're like, let's reparent the inner 5-year-old that feels like it can't take care of itself.
Right.
That's the real work.
Yeah.
So if you're like, ooh, some of those dynamics that you described feel a little bit close to home, like I'm definitely people pleasing, or I'm definitely kind of having trouble with trusting people or advocating for myself. Yeah, that makes sense.
Or I feel like I'm constantly terrified of losing my job. And so I'm trying to, be perfect all of the time.
I want everyone around me to like me all the time. Because I'm afraid if they don't, I'm going to lose my job.
Or I procrastinate all of the time because I'm so afraid of starting something and it not being perfect from the beginning that because my parents would have gotten mad at me if I didn't bring home an A the first time I tried something. And that was not acceptable in my household. I mean, I'm telling you, it runs deep.
Or if you have your own business and you go way above and beyond for your clients or your customers because you're so afraid that they're gonna stop paying you,
abandon you,
and now you're overworking. I mean, it all comes from these root survival fears that got put inside your brain long time ago. So if you're recognizing that and you're like, yeah, I know that I'm probably not bringing the healthiest self to work all the time. And also it's maybe crowding out my my idea of what's possible for me. So even when I consider something different, a new type of job, or maybe a whole new kind of working or a new field, but it's way too scary and that terror starts to bubble up, that's probably a sign that you have some unconscious attachment stuff crowding out what you believe is possible for yourself. And so you can't take action from there.
This is why I'm like, no job is going to solve your unhappiness, because most of it is rooted in this type of stuff, that a new job is actually going to make worse at times, because it's just going to be that you're going to be that much more afraid to lose it because you like it more. So we got to heal before you can get what you think you want. And then once you heal, often what you want changes in a good way.
Because what you thought you wanted was stability and and for nobody to ever rock your boat. And what you really want is creativity or independence or passion or whatever deeper value that's right now hidden behind the fear. Can't even see it. So it's no wonder a lot of people don't know what they want.
Yeah.
Their fear is like a big old cloud hiding out the sun. They can't even see the sun. And they're like, is it just cloudy all the time? Is this just my life? No. It's just that there's a habit of fearful behavior that came from a really understandable place, but it doesn't have to be your life.
Okay. Well, if that resonates with you and you want to work on any of that, you guess who you can call. Your trauma-informed career coaches.
I feel like we need to have a 1-800 number now after that.
CICZ. Wait, no. TICZ. I guess no. So, okay. This is my favorite kind of work to do with people. Like when someone's like, well, I think I want a new job. I'm like, tell me, let's try that again. Like, I want to hear on a deeper level what's really eating at you, and what fears you have, and what you think is not possible for you. And tell me, like, you're going to have to tell me a little bit about what was your dynamic with your parents like, because that's going to tell me a lot about what you're struggling with right now. And oh my God, it gets so much easier, so much faster when you have someone helping you work through this stuff. And by the way, it's not all this stuff. We just start out with this stuff. Very quickly, once we start working through this stuff, you feel lighter.
Yeah.
And then it's so much easier to focus on, well, then like, whoa, now that I'm not trapped by these fears and these beliefs, and like, I can see so much more clearly like who I am, and like maybe like the difference between me and my parents and some of the people who have influenced me, and I know what I want, then it's so much easier to contemplate, well, what would a change in that direction look like? What's not working for me in my current career, and what would feel better? And then how can I start experimenting with that and learning more about that and be held accountable for doing that by Kristen or Rachel, who are going to make sure that I don't just have ideas, but I act on them and I experiment with them and I report back when it goes well or when it goes sideways. And then we work on that some more. It's a whole process that we take you through. So you don't have to think about it. You just get to experience it and know that as you're experiencing it, you're getting better. And then one day, this is what happens every damn time, someone stops and they look back and they go, oh, I changed a lot. And there was no one point at which I could have told you it happened. It was like so gradual that all of a sudden I feel like, oh, those things don't impact me the same way they used to. I'm not afraid the way that I was before. Like that terror I used to feel around this is gone. And they didn't really see it happening because it happened so slowly. That's the point. Slowly, but kind of quickly, though. Gradually, maybe not slowly, gradually, but
yeah, little by little, fast. But way faster than you think.
Yeah.
Yes. To use to keep going with my analogy, right? The beginning of coaching is a lot of that dealing with the clouds. Yeah. You have to work through the clouds. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of bright, like the sun is always behind the clouds. Even when it looks really gloomy out, if you were in an airplane and you got above them, bright sun. That's what happens when you move through a lot of that fear, is all of a sudden it's like, oh,
I was always here.
Like, wow. Like, look at all of the things that are now possible that I was so scared of, I couldn't even contemplate before. So I don't want it to sound like all of coaching is just this like heavy cloudiness. you do have to work through that. Yeah. And it doesn't mean there's not going to still be cloudy days later on, but we pretty quickly get to much more sunshine and warmth more often. And then you're like, oh, this is my new reality. Wow. I didn't really know that was possible.
Turns out I was behind this cloud the whole time. Like, oh, I've always been me. I've always liked what I liked. I've always had these desires, but I just was so obscured by all of this garbage, trauma and fear and assumptions and limitations and programming that I couldn't feel or see that that's who I was or what I wanted. Oh, and now that I can, damn, I got lots of possibilities to explore. Cue more overwhelm that we sometimes then help people work through.
Mm-hmm. So again, if that sounds like a little close to home in one way or another, if you're like, yeah, that sounds like something I might need help with, you have one more week to reach out and say, let's talk about that. Let's talk about doing some coaching, working through this, and getting to a little bit more sunshine, a little bit more often, and getting out of the clouds.
Okay. ClarityOnFire.com/coaching. There's a form on that page. You can sign up to chat with us. Again, I don't know how many spots we have left. It's probably not that many. And if you hear this at some point after next Friday, that's okay. You can still fill out that form and just see what availability we have. And, if you have to wait a few weeks or a month, that's great. Maybe that's divine timing. Maybe you'll be perfectly ready by that point. Hit us up. Okay. I hope to hear from some of you if this is the kind of work you really want to do, because this is the kind of work we like to do with you. And we will be back next Friday with a brand new message from the universe.
Love it. Okay. Well, let's see what the universe has to say next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.